welcome back to Reading with Katy. Yesterday we had a little look at George's Marvellous Medicine, the first chapter, and we thought about some of the characters that were in the story. We had George's mum right at the beginning, we had George, and we had George's grandmother. I asked you to think about what type of characters they are, what type of people they might be, and how the author made you think that. I'm going to carry on today. We're going to finish off chapter 1. We're going to move on to chapter 2. Chapter 2, I've got some different questions for you. So today, as we're reading, I want you to think about why George came up with something called a marvellous plan, which we'll find out a little bit more about in a moment. I'm going to ask you to see if you can spot any rhyming words while I'm reading, and whether or not George coming up with a marvellous plan has made you change your mind about the type of boy that he is, the type of boy that you thought that he might have been when we were reading yesterday. So at the end of yesterday's chapter, we saw Grandma and George talking to each other, and Grandma had spoken about sharing some secrets with George. Okay. Some of us, she said, and all at once she was leaning forward in her chair and whispering in a throaty sort of voice George had never heard her use before. Some of us, she said, have magic powers that can twist the creatures of this earth into wondrous shapes. A tingle of electricity flashed down the length of George's spine. He began to feel frightened. Some of us, the old woman went on, have fire on our tongues and sparks in our bellies and wizardry in the tips of our fingers. Some of us know secrets that would make your hair stand up on end and your eyes pop out of their sockets. George wanted to run away, but his feet seemed stuck to the floor. We know how to make your nails drop off and your teeth grow out of your fingers instead. George began to tremble. It was her face that frightened him most of all, the frosty smile, the brilliant unblinking eyes. We know how to have you wake up in the morning with a long tail coming out from behind you. Grandma, he cried, stop! We know secrets, my dear, about dark places where dark things live and squirm and slither all over each other. George made a dive for the door. It doesn't matter how far you run, he heard her saying. You won't ever get away. George ran into the kitchen, slamming the door behind him. That was the end of chapter 1. The next chapter talks about the marvellous plan. So just a reminder, today you're going to be thinking about why George might have come up with a marvellous plan. You're going to see if you can spot any rhyming words that sound the same, like dog and log or cat and mat. And has George's plan made you change your mind about the type of boy he is? Chapter 2, the marvellous plan. George sat himself down on the table in the kitchen. He was shaking a little. Oh, how he hated Grandma. He really hated that horrid old witchy woman. And all of a sudden, he had a tremendous urge to do something about her. Something whopping, something absolutely terrific. A real shocker, a sort of explosion. He wanted to blow away the witchy smell that hung about her in the next room. He may have been only 8 years old, but he was a brave little boy. He was ready to take this old woman on. I'm not going to be frightened by her, he said softly to himself. But he was frightened, and that's why he wanted to suddenly to explode her away. Well, not quite away, but he did want to shake the old woman up a bit. Very well then, what should it be, this whopping, terrific, exploding shocker for Grandma? He would have liked to put a firework banger under her chair, but he didn't have one. He would have liked to have put a long green snake down the back of her dress, but he didn't have a long green snake. He would have liked to have put 6 black rats in the room with her and locked the door, but he didn't have 6 big black rats. As George sat there pondering this interesting problem, his eyes fell upon the bottle of Grandma's brown medicine standing on the sideboard. Rotten stuff it seemed to be. 4 times a day, a large spoonful of it would be shovelled into her mouth, and it didn't do her the slightest bit of good. She was always just as horrid after she had it as she was before. The whole point of medicine surely was to make a person better. If it didn't do that, Then it was quite useless. So-ho, thought George suddenly. Aha, ho-hum. He knew exactly what to do. I shall make her a new medicine, one that is so strong and so fierce and so fantastic that it'll either cure her completely or blow off the top of her head. I'll make her a magic medicine, a medicine no doctor in the world has ever made before. George looked at the kitchen clock. It said 10:05. There was nearly an hour left before Grandma's next dose was due at 11. Here we go then, cried George, jumping up from the table. A magic medicine it shall be. So give me a bug and a jumping flea, give me 2 snails and a lizard's 3, and a slimy squiggler from the sea, and a poisonous sting of a bumblebee, and the juice of a fruit of the jube tree, and the powdered bone of a wombat's knee, and 100 other things as well, each with a rather nasty smell.